Ethan had spent weeks preparing the perfect second anniversary. From the reservation at their favorite rooftop restaurant to the small velvet box, he kept checking in his pocket. He imagined the look on Emily's face, the smile, the surprise, the warmth of the moment they would share. But instead of excitement, all he received was a short message that shattered the entire evening. "Hey, I'm going to the club with the girls tonight. Rain check." He stared at the screen, stunned, wondering how someone could forget a day that meant so much to him. The candles he had set up, the handwritten note he rewrote 3 times, the memories he hoped they would add, none of it seemed to matter anymore. And in that quiet, disappointing moment, Ethan had no idea that this simple text would be the spark for a storm he never saw coming. Ethan sat in his car for several minutes after reading Emily's message, trying to convince himself that it didn't hurt as much as it did. He had replayed the possibilities in his mind. Maybe she was joking. Maybe she mixed up the dates. Maybe her friends forced her into going out. But each excuse felt weaker than the last. He finally stepped out of the car and walked toward the restaurant anyway, partly because he couldn't bear the thought of going home to silence, partly because he still wished she would change her mind and show up. Inside, the host recognized him and asked if he wanted to wait, but Ethan quietly shook his head. He canceled the reservation and stepped back into the chilly evening air, unsure what to do next. He didn't want to waste the night he had been looking forward to for so long. He didn't want all his preparation to evaporate into nothing. While he stood there debating whether to grab a drink alone or just drive aimlessly, a familiar voice called his name. Grace, Emily's half-sister, was walking toward him with a bag of takeout in hand, surprised to see him dressed up. She asked if he and Emily were celebrating something, noticing the way he awkwardly tried to hide the small box in his jacket. Ethan hesitated, then explained in a few short sentences what had happened. Grace's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, to something bordering on anger, though not at him. She muttered that Emily had been planning to go out all week, meaning she hadn't forgotten. She just hadn't cared. The sting of that realization hit Ethan harder than he was prepared for. Grace noticed his disappointment and gently asked what he was planning to do with the rest of his evening. He shrugged, saying he'd probably just find something to eat and call it a night, but even he didn't sound convinced. Grace glanced at the restaurant behind him, then at the empty street, and said she hated the idea of him spending the night alone after putting in so much effort. Ethan tried to brush it off, insisting it was fine, but Grace shook her head firmly. She said that no good person should be left hanging on a night meant to celebrate love. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Going to dinner with Emily's sister sounded like exactly the kind of situation that could explode if misunderstood. But Grace wasn't asking out of pity or drama. She simply didn't want him to waste something meaningful because of someone else's carelessness. And there was something comforting in her sincerity. Finally, Ethan gave a small, tired smile and asked if she had eaten yet. Grace lifted the takeout bag and laughed, saying she could always eat again, especially if it meant salvaging someone's ruined anniversary. Without thinking too hard, Ethan agreed, and they began walking toward a cozy restaurant nearby. He had no idea that this spontaneous decision, one made to fill an empty evening, would set off a chain of events far more complicated than anything he had imagined. The restaurant Grace suggested was a small, quiet place tucked between 2 larger buildings, the kind of spot most people walked past without noticing. Ethan had never been there before, but the warm lights and soft music helped ease the lingering ache in his chest. Grace chose a booth in the corner, far enough from other diners to give them privacy, and set her takeout bag aside with a playful sigh. She joked that Emily would probably be furious if she knew her perfectly curated party night plans had accidentally led to this dinner. Ethan managed a weak laugh, though part of him still felt guilty for being there. Grace quickly picked up on his hesitation and reassured him that he had done nothing wrong. She said that people who value you don't throw away important moments, like anniversaries, for a night of loud music and cheap drinks. Her blunt honesty surprised him, but it also lifted a weight he didn't realize he was carrying. As the food arrived, their conversation shifted into something lighter. Grace talked about her art projects, her chaotic job schedule, and the weird customers she encountered daily. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had expected, appreciating how easy it was to talk to her. She listened without judgment as he explained how long he had prepared for the anniversary, how much the night had meant to him, and how confused he felt about Emily's recent distance. Grace didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss his feelings, and didn't offer empty reassurances. She simply acknowledged what he felt and validated it in a quiet, sincere way. The meal stretched longer than either of them anticipated. At one point, Grace noticed the small velvet box again and asked softly if she could see what was inside. Ethan hesitated for just a second before opening it, revealing the delicate silver necklace he had chosen after days of searching. Grace whispered that it was beautiful, almost too beautiful for someone who couldn't bother to show up. Her voice wasn't cruel, just honest in a way that made Ethan swallow hard. Not wanting the gift to sit in a drawer as a painful reminder, Ethan gently pushed the box toward her. He told her she made the night better just by being there, and he wanted someone who truly appreciated the moment to have it. Grace froze, stunned by the gesture, but he insisted. With a shy but grateful smile, she accepted the necklace and promised she would cherish it. After dinner, they stepped outside into the cool night air. Grace, excited about the gift, asked if she could take a quick picture to thank him publicly. Nothing dramatic, just a simple appreciation post. Ethan shrugged and said he didn't mind. Grace snapped a photo, captioned it with a heartfelt message about unexpected kindness, and posted it without a second thought. Neither of them realized how fast it would travel. By the time Ethan reached his car, Grace's notifications were already buzzing nonstop. The picture was spreading, gathering comments, whispers, and speculation from people who knew them, especially people who knew Emily. That single photo, meant to express gratitude, was about to become the spark that lit the entire powder keg. Emily was still at the club when she first saw the photo, the one of Grace smiling softly with the silver necklace resting against her collarbone. A friend shoved the phone in her face, laughing as she said, "Isn't that Ethan's gift for your anniversary?" Emily's smile froze instantly. The music around her seemed to fade, replaced by a sharp buzzing in her ears. She stepped away from the group, opened the post herself, and reread the caption over and over as if the words might magically change. But they didn't. Grace had tagged Ethan, thanked him for a meaningful evening, and included a photo wearing the necklace Emily had no idea existed. Her chest tightened with something between shock, jealousy, and rage. She immediately called Ethan, and when he answered, she didn't even bother saying hello. Her voice came out sharp and trembling as she demanded to know why her sister was wearing a gift meant for her. Ethan tried to stay calm, explaining the situation exactly as it was, that she had canceled their anniversary, that he didn't want the evening to go to waste, and that the necklace felt more meaningful in the hands of someone who had actually shown up. Before he could finish, Emily exploded. She accused him of humiliating her publicly, of being insensitive, of betraying their relationship by taking her sister out on their anniversary night. Ethan tried to remind her that she was the one who chose to go partying instead of celebrating with him, but Emily refused to hear any of it. She claimed he should have waited like a mature boyfriend and insisted that the party had been important because it was Mia's birthday. But that excuse fell apart the moment Ethan mentioned he already knew the truth. He told her Grace had said Mia's birthday wasn't that night, and that Emily had planned to go clubbing long before the anniversary. There was a long, furious silence on the other end of the call before Emily snapped that Grace was lying for attention. Ethan could hear her voice rising louder and louder, drawing stares from people around her. She accused Grace of doing it intentionally, of trying to sabotage her relationship, and of using Ethan to make herself look better online. Ethan tried to intervene, telling her she was being unreasonable, but Emily had already spiraled too far. When he suggested that her anger was less about the necklace and more about being caught in her own lie, she completely lost control. She shouted that he had no right to judge her and that he had embarrassed her in front of everyone. The argument escalated until Emily finally screamed that she didn't want to see him again, until he fixed the situation and forced Grace to delete the post. Then she hung up on him. Ethan sat in his parked car, stunned by how quickly everything had unraveled. What he didn't know was that Emily wasn't done. Fueled by humiliation, fear, and a bruised ego, she marched back into the club and began ranting to anyone who would listen. People recorded her. People whispered. People speculated. And as those murmurs spread across social media, the drama that had started with one simple, innocent photo was about to explode in ways none of them were prepared for. Emily barely slept that night, packing her apartment as notifications poured in, each one reminding her that people were talking about the photo. The longer she scrolled, the more her frustration twisted into something darker. By morning, she had convinced herself that she was the victim, and the only way to fix her public image was to control the narrative before it slipped any further. She began by posting a long, emotional message on her story, claiming that Ethan had blindsided her, that she had never been told about the anniversary dinner, and that Grace had taken advantage of the situation to make her look bad. She sprinkled in dramatic phrases like betrayal within the family and manipulated by the people closest to me. Within minutes, her friends began messaging her, some offering sympathy, others asking for details, and a few questioning whether the story even added up. Emily ignored every doubt, choosing only to screenshot and repost the supportive comments. But it didn't stop there. She started subtly shading both Ethan and Grace online, sharing quotes about disloyal partners and two-faced siblings, each one painfully obvious to anyone who knew them. The comments section quickly split into factions, with some defending her and others pointing out inconsistencies in her story. Grace, confused and hurt, chose to stay silent at first, hoping the storm would pass. But Emily wasn't satisfied. She took the drama offline, messaging mutual friends and even distant relatives, insisting they pressure Grace to return the necklace. When they refused, she escalated further. She offered money, actual cash, to anyone who could convince Grace to hand it back. The more people pushed back, the more unhinged she became. Emily then created a burner account, using it to leave snide comments under Grace's posts, calling her names and hinting that she had stolen someone's boyfriend for clout. She sent similar messages to Ethan, accusing him of being weak, naive, and easily manipulated. Grace eventually discovered the fake account when one of the usernames matched an email Emily had once used for an old subscription. Confronting her only made things worse. Emily went into full denial, claiming someone must have hacked her, despite the tone, spelling, and timing matching her perfectly. Meanwhile, the online conversation grew larger as more people became aware of the situation. Old acquaintances came forward, sharing screenshots from past interactions with Emily, times she had exaggerated stories, created drama, or tried to turn people against each other. Her attempts to control the narrative were slipping. Every post she made seemed to backfire, and every defensive rant only fueled more suspicion. Even the people who initially supported her began to distance themselves quietly, not wanting to get caught in the increasingly chaotic mess. Back at home, Ethan watched everything unfold with a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. He had hoped the situation would fade once Emily calmed down, but it was spiraling faster than anyone expected. Grace, though hurt, tried to reassure him that they hadn't done anything wrong, but Ethan couldn't help feeling responsible for the chaos. What none of them knew was that things were about to escalate even further. A few people who had stayed silent until now, people who knew Emily far better than she realized, were preparing to speak up. And once they did, The fragile narrative Emily had fought so desperately to craft would shatter completely. Rumors continued swirling online, and Emily doubled down on every lie she had told, convinced that if she pushed hard enough, people would eventually choose her side. But the turning point came when one of her closest friends, tired of the manipulations, finally snapped. She posted a short comment under Emily's latest dramatic story, saying, "Funny how you're pretending to be the victim when you've been flirting with Tom for months." The internet paused for a moment before exploding. Dozens of people began chiming in, confirming what the friend had said. Some shared old screenshots of Emily's flirty messages to Tom, messages sent while she was still dating Ethan. Others recalled times she had bragged about keeping Tom as a backup, just in case things with Ethan got boring. Emily tried to deny everything, but her attempts were weak and frantic. People kept posting receipts, timestamps, photos, snippets of conversations, and the more evidence surfaced, the more obvious her lies became. Her carefully constructed version of events was collapsing. Instead of accepting accountability, Emily pivoted again. She appeared on a small podcast run by an acquaintance, hoping to win back public sympathy. She cried dramatically, insisted Ethan had emotionally abandoned her, and claimed Grace had always been jealous of her. She went as far as saying Ethan gave Grace the necklace because he had feelings he'd been hiding, twisting the story until she sounded like the tragic heroine of a soap opera. But the moment the podcast went live, Ethan received several messages from people who had watched it. Most were shocked by how wildly Emily had twisted the truth. Some were furious on his behalf. Instead of responding emotionally, Ethan made a calm, deliberate decision. He gathered everything, screenshots of their messages, the original anniversary reservation, the text where she canceled for the club, even old conversations proving she knew about the date well in advance. He included screenshots from people exposing her flirtation with Tom, alongside a few from Tom himself, who admitted he had no idea she was using his name to stir drama. Then he posted a simple, measured statement. He carefully recounted what actually happened, without insults or theatrics, and attached a collection of receipts that spoke for themselves. Within an hour, the comments turned. People who had defended Emily deleted their posts. Friends who once supported her publicly apologized to Grace and Ethan. A few even admitted they had warned Emily privately to stop lying before it got this bad. Emily's reputation plummeted faster than she could react. Clips from her meltdown at the club resurfaced, stitched together with her contradictory claims. The podcast episode was relentlessly mocked, with viewers pointing out every inconsistency. People she barely knew chimed in, sharing times she had exaggerated stories for attention or stirred drama for entertainment. By the end of the day, Emily tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, then as a joke, then as an emotional breakdown, each explanation worse than the last. She lost followers. She lost friends. She lost credibility. And most painfully, she lost the power she believed she had over the narrative. For the first time, Emily had to face the truth. She wasn't the victim of a cruel plot. She was the architect of her own downfall, and now everyone could see it. Ethan spent the following weeks trying to distance himself from the chaos, focusing instead on work and the quiet parts of life he had neglected. Grace checked in on him regularly, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely cared about how he was handling everything. Their conversations, once brief and awkward, began to stretch longer each day. What started as small check-ins gradually turned into late-night talks about dreams, fears, childhood stories, and the strange ways people cope with disappointment. Ethan found comfort in how effortlessly honest Grace was. She didn't sugarcoat anything, didn't pretend to have all the answers, and never made him feel foolish for admitting when something still bothered him. Grace, in turn, found a surprising sense of ease around him, something she rarely felt with anyone else. They didn't try to rush whatever was forming between them. They simply let it breathe, Let it unfold on its own timeline. One weekend, Grace invited Ethan to an art showcase where she was displaying a few of her pieces. He arrived early, wanting to support her, and was quietly proud when he saw how many people admired her work. Grace lit up when she spotted him in the crowd, waving him over to introduce him to friends who had heard plenty about him already. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of normalcy, something warm, steady, and promising. But the peace didn't last long. Halfway through the event, Emily suddenly appeared at the entrance, her presence sucking the air out of the room. Some people nudged each other, whispering as they recognized her from the online drama. Emily marched toward Ethan and Grace with a desperate mix of anger and embarrassment. She accused them of humiliating her, of ruining her life, and demanded that they stop spreading lies, even though she had been the one exposed. Grace remained calm, telling her she needed to leave, but Emily grew louder, drawing unwanted attention. She tried to spin yet another version of the story, claiming Ethan had purposely used Grace to get back at her. But this time, no one in the room seemed convinced. One of Emily's new friends, who had accompanied her, stepped back awkwardly as soon as she realized what was happening. Within minutes, that same friend quietly slipped out of the gallery, unwilling to attach herself to the spectacle. Emily looked around and realized she had no allies left. Not one person rushed to defend her. Not one person believed her excuses. The humiliation settled in slowly, and for the first time, she seemed to understand the magnitude of the damage she had caused, not just to Ethan and Grace, but to herself. She left the gallery without another word. After the chaos subsided, Grace turned to Ethan with an apologetic sigh, but he simply shook his head and said he was done letting Emily's actions dictate his life. Grace smiled softly, relieved. They spent the rest of the evening walking through the gallery, discussing art, life, and the strange ways people reveal who they really are under pressure. By the end of the night, something between them shifted, not abruptly, but naturally, like a door that had been waiting to be opened. Ethan walked Grace home, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about what the future could look like. There was no rush, no pressure, no lingering shadows from the past. Just two people slowly realizing that the comfort they found in each other wasn't temporary. It was real, and it was growing stronger with every passing day. A month passed, and the chaos that once consumed their lives slowly faded into background noise. Emily's attempts at repairing her reputation only made her look more desperate, and most people had already moved on, leaving her to deal with the consequences alone. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself settling into a quieter, more grounded rhythm. Grace had become a steady presence, someone who didn't demand anything from him, yet gave him more peace than he had felt in years. They continued spending time together, not as a rebound or an escape, but as two people discovering something genuine in the aftermath of a storm. One evening, Grace wore the silver necklace again while they cooked dinner together, and Ethan realized it no longer reminded him of disappointment. It had taken on a new meaning, one tied to gratitude, growth, and choosing someone who truly valued him. As they talked and laughed in the soft kitchen light, Ethan understood that he hadn't lost anything worth keeping. He had simply let go of the wrong person to make space for the right one.